This is the Acts 2028 podcast,
where two young Church of God pastors
discuss the challenges and victories we face in leading revitalization.
I am TJ Samuelu.
I am Brian Seidel.
I am in an urban context in Seattle, Washington.
I am in a suburban and rural context in Boise, Idaho.
I am in a liberal state.
I am in a conservative state.
My ministry background is in missions.
My ministry background is in youth ministry.
And yet we are both in our first lead roles.
To help God revitalize the existing church in the Pacific Northwest.
We are helping each other.
And you.
To truly live out Acts 2028.
Hey, TJ, great to be back with you again. How are you doing?
Doing all right. We are busy. We are rolling, but we're rolling into the holiday season, just kind of getting ready to celebrate Thanksgiving. And then obviously we roll into a busy time of the year as we roll into the Advent season and Christmas. What about you?
So, yeah, same. I think just as I told you when we first got on, like I'm busier than I want to be. And it always seems that way. But yet I also know about myself that if I had any downtime, I would find something to fill it because that's just who I am. And I don't like downtime. So definitely. But yeah, coming into this holiday season, looking forward to some time with my family and a few extra days away for Thanksgiving. And as I'm sure most people are. But yeah, and then we're jumping right into that Advent season, right? I mean, it's crazy that it starts so fast. I mean, the first Sunday, literally right after Thanksgiving, is the first Sunday of Advent. So yeah, to fit those, 4 Sundays in there before Christmas, definitely have to jump right into that. So, but just a couple of kind of housekeeping things. And I know, like you said, as we continue to roll through this and, as we walk through life and ministry together and with our audience, I have got some feedback from people, and it's great to hear from people who listen to the podcast. So if you are a listener, again, we'd love to hear from you. You can follow us on our social media feeds, send us an email at acts2028podcast@gmail.com. I mean, it's kind of the easiest way, or social media feeds, to get a hold of us. But, one of the things I've heard from people is that they don't realize that we're on more than just Podbean. So Podbean is where we host our podcast. It's at, but it is on every, basically, I guess that we know of, every podcast platform that you might probably use. So it's on the Apple Podcast app. It's in Google Play. If you're one of those Android people, we don't leave you out either. It's on there, and a lot of third-party apps. So again, if you have a way other than just website that you listen to podcasts, chances are we're probably on there. So go ahead and search for it. And I'll say if we're not on one that you want us on, then I guess shoot us a message and we'll figure out how to get it on there. So, but yeah, and while you're on there, again, share it, give us some ratings, reviews, invite other people to listen. Like you said, we are still just a startup show, right? And, you're talking about that, we enjoyed hanging out together, talking about this stuff. And so, so again, I think we would do it even if nobody listened, but it's nice that people actually do listen as well.
Yeah, and I'll tell my parents to stop sending you those emails so we can get that. Just like, but no, so I think that's important, right? To be able to have, wherever your favorite podcast is had, check it out, find where it's at. There's a lot of opportunity for enrichment through podcasts. I know that, when I'm busy or working out or different things, it's just easy to take it with you and, to just get poured into at times. So hopefully this has a value add for people as well, that they're seeing that and they can take us with us. We're more accessible than maybe they had once thought. So good shout out on that. And we're thankful for those that are. I mean, if there's something, or even like you said, Brian, if there's something that even content, we're always looking for an opportunity. If there's a subject matter or something that you're walking through, like in an established church, or you're trying to process through that, it doesn't necessarily have to be a show, but we'd love to maybe try to help speak into that, or at least share our testimony of how we've navigated through those things as we've currently served. And so we just want to be a resource. We want to be able to help. Our relationship is, great that we have that. But if there's something else too, yeah, that's why we exist. So we'll keep going. Hopefully there's those that are following along.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's about the just community, seeking community together, those different places that we can find it, whether it's in our own church, in the community with other pastors, within our family and kind of close circle of accountability type of people. And, one of the things that came up in that discussion that we felt like we could dig deeper on, probably kind of look specifically at, and that is the staff within our church, right? And how do we staff? Even do you have staff? And I think walking into, especially potentially an established church, I mean, there's a wide range of possibilities you could walk into. Right? I mean, again, you could be coming into where you are the only staff person. You could be walking into where there are existing staff, and how do you navigate that? Because kind of what's your philosophy, I guess, that's going forward. Again, I know that there's different plans or policies or procedures out there in different churches. I mean, I've heard of some that, like, again, when a new lead pastor comes in, that everybody is automatically resigned, and then that pastor gets to hire their own people, or decide who they hire back or who they bring in. That's, of course, one way to go about it, I guess. Then the other way would be nobody is fired, right? Other than lead pastor comes in, and then that leader just inherits everybody and tries to figure out who they are and whether, where they fit, and probably everything in between. So I think just as we talk about staff and again, I think part of that is even knowing, which is kind of probably a different topic, but of who has the authority to hire and fire, who gets to decide when it's time to add another staff member or not. Again, is that a board decision? Is that an elder decision? Is it you as a lead pastor? Does the staff have any input into that? I mean, there's lots of ways we could go with this and questions, and, but again, ultimately that is one of the questions, by the way, that you need to know, not just when it comes to staffing, is who has the power to make what decisions. And I think that's, like you said, that's kind of one of the things we have slated down to probably talk about at another show. But that's very important. And so, and it's very important, especially with staffing, right? Of, man, do I have the authority, right, in the position that I'm walking into, to decide how this happens? And again, that's just something that you hopefully will find out during the interview process, right? Like before you end up at the church, but maybe not, right? And so if you don't know that, or even if you're at your church already, or even if you're not the lead person, if you're even on staff, do you know who has the power to fire you and who doesn't? I mean, and again, we can, I guess, argue whether any church employee should ever be fired. I don't, but it happens all the time. I mean, we hear that, again, a lot of, especially, it seems like staff, maybe not lead pastors, but even lead pastors get pushed out, get fired, they're told, forced to resign, right? However that comes around, right? I mean, we always have these language that we use in church culture to make it seem like somebody didn't get fired, but the reality is they did. So, but anyways, it's a big can of worms. So why don't we start here? Why don't we just start with identifying what situation we walked into when we went to our churches? So TJ, yeah. What was it like at Fairview when you showed up?
Well, I would say, like, maybe even before going back to that, I wanted to touch on one of those things, because I've been a part of being a secondary piece, like you were saying, in an established church, and we brought in a new pastor. And what I would say from two sides, and I know this now, so from a leadership standpoint, this shaped me incredibly for wanting to know how to handle things or encourage them. So it has multi perspectives. So one of the things when I was serving at that church, the elder board, who kind of had that governance over that position as we were seeking a new senior or lead pastor, they wrote some things in that said the new guy could not remove somebody for 90 days. And so there was a period to where they couldn't establish their own staff. And you kind of hit on some of those other scenarios, like when someone comes in, everybody offers the resignation. If he keeps them, then that's kind of one rule. But in this one, I was unaware that they'd kind of made that. And what was being communicated, I think the elders wanted to keep the staff intact. But what ended up materializing was, I got put in this no man's land for like 90 days, and it felt awkward, and it felt like, do they want it? Am I supposed to stay here? And I guess now being the lead guy, I get some of the pressure, but it was like communicated like, I just can't really say anything right now. Let's just make it through this. And ultimately, it was kind of that they wanted to bring in their own person. And so I think even sometimes when you handle this, when who's in power, with when you have volunteers, when you have staff, um, man, my desire would be to handle that well, and it shaped it because I guess I left that, like you said, whether the term is fired or not, uh, like you feel so devalued, and the
Yeah.
calling that you have uh, could be brought into question, I think, if you're not deeply rooted, right? And so, like, I know I found myself at that road, and really felt like, God, I want to be used, but I want to be kind of like this. Some of these next people we're talking about, like key and volunteer people, like I want to be the best layperson that I can. I just don't want to be a part of this anymore. Like I'll volunteer, I'll help lead Sunday school, I'll do whatever I need to, but I don't want to ever be hurt like this again. And so I think, when you talk about staffing, when you talk about those things, it was birthed in me at that point. Even if you do desire to ask and have your staff, like you were saying, you're coming into an established church. So now getting back to Fairview, you're coming into an established church. What authority do you have? And then just be kind of like more transparent. I think you can handle that, setting that up ahead of time, as opposed to blindsiding people, feeling like, some of these pre-existing employees, like you can do everything you want except for get rid of these employees, these two. Well, how many employees can I have? Well, two. And then you kind of find yourself in this situation, right? So when I came here to Fairview, we didn't have anyone. Historically, they'd had a worship pastor, they'd had a children's pastor, a youth pastor throughout the years, and they had some of these, and sometimes they weren't completely full-time employees, but they had the roles and they had the position. So we came into a place where I'm the only person. We have kind of an arrangement, kind of like on a part time with our worship leader. She comes in and does Sundays and does some prep throughout the week, obviously, to be ready for that. And then we had shared staff. So we have a child center that we have here. And, they were able to, they're kind of like shared. So because we're a smaller church and we didn't have a lot of things, some of their costs are considered like 5/7 or there's a fraction, knowing that there's a couple days during the week, like Sunday and some others that the church would have them. The days that they're here also for the child center, they're also a shared cost. So they kind of help facilitate that. So some of our support and administrative staff, or like even our janitor for the child center, we wouldn't have one here every day because the church doesn't meet every day. So some of those things were uniquely inherited in that context. And so they're shared costs. So um, that's kind of what we came under. There is a history of having more positions, but right now that's not where we're at. And so I think there's going to be some of those things, including growth, that will determine some of those. And I think, you even have some of those pieces of what is it when you add another staff member and what does that role look like. So I think you're probably, as we talked about, a little bit further down the road in some of those things. But I think some of the other things that we'll cover today, but before I kick it to you, are going to be, like I said myself, what I was going to be is a lay member. So key volunteers, key people that move that forward. And oftentimes those could be people that have passion. They can be elders, they can be board members, and then just some of that staff. So B, what did you kind of come into at Oregon Trail? You had some positions, you were at established church, and then kind of, I guess maybe what is your rubric? What is your scorecard to kind of know what is next steps for you?
Yeah. So, and again, this is actually probably one of the things that was central to Oregon Trail to me coming in, was the structure of staffing. Because as we know, again, you don't come into a revitalization situation without, without the church being in hard times. I mean, there's a reason why it's shrunk down, right? Or why it needs to be revitalized. And so, and again, just looking back at the reasons that Oregon Trail had struggles, it was all centered on staffing. And like, again, there was like I mean, there were some deep rooted problems and issues that kind of came out, but again, it all hit the fan through their staffing structure. And so that was kind of the looking back at that, and through that was again, and we talked about DB last time, and again he was the guy who was here before me, and that was part of it, and he was at the core of this change was. Because there was different staffing issues, and again, the board, the way it was under him was the board was in charge of all employees. And so not only was the board, was Don accountable to them, but all of the employees were, and the board had all of the authority of hiring or of evaluating or firing. The problem was that the board wasn't doing anything. And so there were these kind of issues that started to arise within some of the staff and, some different things. And Don found his hands tied because he had no authority to reprimand or discipline or or kind of to lead ultimately, like, and so he was just, his only role was to go to the board and say, hey, this is a problem, you guys need to deal with it. And then they didn't. And so they did everything again. And again, I don't know that now, everything I do about it. I mean, there's like, I wasn't here, but then just the fallout ended up pushing the church into this really hard, tough season. And so in the midst of that, like I said, that was when Don kind of came to them after all of this went down, and Don kind of realized how much his hands were really tied because of that structure. Was when he went to the board and just said, hey guys, like, I mean, I'm still here, but I'm only here as an interim person because, he's like, there's some systemic changes that need to happen. This church needs new leadership. And, but he was, again, the wise man he is, and we've already kind of built him up last time we've talked about that. But I mean, I'll continue to say that because he had best in his wise viewpoint, he came to them and said, but we have to change the foundational problem with the structure before we can ever rebuild it. Because we have to learn from what happened, right? And to see that it didn't work. And so, because I think whether you're talking about staffing or any kind of bylaws or structure or anything, is because everything is fine when everything's fine, right? Like even a bad structure functions when everything's fine, right? It's when it gets tested is when it shows whether it's a good or bad structure, right? Or whether it's sustainable or not. And again, that was just what Don came. He's like, hey, it was tested and it failed. So again, they went through a whole bunch of bylaw changes and kind of that, but one of the major bylaw changes that was made and to the structure of it was in the way that staff was handled. And so the way that we are now is where, again, I am accountable to the board. The board is my boss as the lead / senior pastor, but then all the other staff are managed by me. And so and again, there's pluses and minuses to every structure, everything, right? But all of that weight is now on my shoulders. And so I manage all the staff. I'm in charge of all their evaluations of what positions we need and what we don't need. Kind of all of that plays on me, right? Again, I make those decisions. And so, and ultimately though, if those staff members aren't performing, then again, that's also on me, right? And so, again, the board obviously in an advisable way can say like, hey, you need to deal with this, but it's my job to deal with it. It's not, it used to be the board's job. So again, that was kind of unique coming into that. And so as I did step into that, like I said, it was at kind of bare bones. And so honestly, when I got here, it was I was the only full-time employee, just like you walked into with Fairview. And then there were some other just kind of other people around, and some that were paid, but the majority of those positions were volunteer, which I think, and that's the other reality of staffing, is that you will never be able to pay enough people to run a church without, and not need volunteers. Like, you will always need volunteers. It doesn't matter how many employees you have, how big your church gets. A pipe dream to think that, we can just hire people. And the truth is that will never be true.
Right. So, I think that there's, something there. I think you touched on one major point where you have the difference between a pastoral led and a board led church. And I think again, some of those are good, some of them are bad. I think part of that is going to determine based on the individual that's called to lead the congregation, right? Like, so for the pastor, you've accepted some of that responsibility. Like, I can rise
Hmm.
and fall with having the staff on my radar, like I'm okay with that. Some people, say, hey, look, I love to preach and I'm just a teacher. And as far as the administrative stuff, I would rather somebody else do it. Now, again, some of the drawbacks to some of those things is you got to have a good working relationship with your leadership regardless, right? Because I think as you inform them, I think one of the things that's always hard is the board members don't get a chance to see all of the things that we see. And so
Yeah.
oftentimes I try to defend like our board members for the most part, because remember, a lot of them are serving in a volunteer capacity, that they came to this and they're asked to make difficult decisions for the trajectory of the church based off of a perspective or just a snapshot of what's presented to them. And oftentimes in the roles that we hold, that's up to us. So that if you're taking over a church, you have to be able to communicate that well to your leadership, where that need is, how you want to respond to that, and you have to be proactive. And so I think some of those things kind of come into play, but it's really difficult if you have a board led church and they're not as engaged. Um, Kind of like you just described, that is a really difficult situation because they don't know how to adequately serve, because they don't know everything that's going on, and they're asked to make a decision based off of um, just a being informed by one perspective. So I think
Yeah,
those would be some
absolutely.
some clarity things that I just would say on that piece for me, is you were presenting that, because I've seen it. So
Yeah,
I would
absolutely.
say having those relationships with those key people is so important. And then, I think it is good to have that accountability. I mean, and we could drill down on these things so much deeper, but still on a surface level, one of the things is if you have a staff and kind of the question I put down when you're saying that is how to lead when you aren't the leader, right? Like that's a really tough position to be in. You and I have been in a
Yeah.
spot even as associate guys that we were the number twos, and there might be some thoughts or some opportunities that you see to make improvements or those things. But if you're not the leader, sometimes those aren't your role. But if you are and you're in a board situation like this, last thing that you want, there could be all sorts of other things, but one that comes to mind would be, the old workaround, like the staff that kind of then feels like they don't have to respect or do things. And if you get someone that's in there for the wrong reasons, they could come and say, well, you can't fire me anyhow. I'll just go around you. I'll go and talk to the board. So knowing the structure that you have is vital, so that
Yeah.
you know where those potential pitfalls could be, knowing where they're at. Again, I think part of it for our story in that is knowing that if change isn't there or you're not called, sometimes God could be moving you on. And that's ultimately how we moved to both of our positions. And so just kind
Yeah.
of knowing that as far as encouragement, but sometimes you're put in a position where, you're asked to lead, but you don't have the authority to lead. And so I wanted to make sure that we had that, but yeah, so
Yeah, absolutely.
staffing is always is a tough one. So yeah, go ahead, jump back in.
Well, no, well, and I was going to say again, just to your point, like no matter which structure you're in, communication is still needed, and I think, and it's still, a collaborative effort. I think because again, if it is board driven, then they still need, like you said, they need the input from the lead pastor or the staff to know what the day to day looks like. Now the flip side of that is even in my structure is that my hands are still kind of tied by the board because they hold all of the authority of the money. Right? And so I cannot hire somebody. Well, I guess I could hire them, but I can't pay them unless the board approves it. Right. So so again, like it is time. I mean, but I think that's very important is that there are that communication, even those checks and balances that are in place of whichever structure is there or hybrid of it or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so again, the board needs to hear from me about what's my vision as far as when we need to hire somebody or whatever that might be, because they have to back it financially. right? And if they don't, then, like I said, I could hire them, right? I mean, technically, but I can't pay them. So which would then by definition make them a volunteer, right? So I guess as we, again, as you navigate that, I think it's just important to know your structure, but also to know, again, and every structure comes with its pluses and minuses, right? Nothing is perfect. But then I think also knowing, again, those avenues of communication and those checks and balances that need to be there as well. Because you don't want just one person dictating everything. And that whether it's a board chairman or a senior pastor or whatever it is, that's a very dangerous place to be. Now, the other thing that we've kind of,
yeah, it's just it's really that accountability piece. And so like we all know that ourselves being broken, we're also going to help serve broken people. And so part of that safeguard is that you have those procedures and things in play to where there is accountability, to where if someone tries to go after you, you have the covering of those things, whether that is the board or whether that is, some different things that you have to say, no, here's where we're at. We have this squared away because we've had the conversation. We have not only communication, but we have clear defined goals, maybe even like escalators to where these things happen or these programs start because this has taken place. And so, those things could range from not only just staff members and stuff that we're talking about. These could be, if you're in a revitalization, it could either be taking away, we've talked about golden caps, taking away a service and condensing down to one if you did two, or going the opposite. Maybe you're starting to grow because the Lord is finding favor in the sense, and people are coming back together to assemble, and health is taking place, and you got to go from one to two. You need to have some of those things that, like, just basic. If you're in a small building or you're renting, hey, if we get past 100, this room only holds that. So we're going to need to have a second service, and just having those conversations. I know it takes a little bit of legwork up front, but it helps eradicate and it helps minimize the foothold that Satan can have to try to say, oh, well, why are you doing this? Why is this happening? Because again, from a different perspective, it's like using a statistic. You can almost make it say what it wants. And so not being clearly defined, not being able to be on the same page, you just kind of take away some of those potentials. And trust me, if you're listening to this and you are involved in a church revitalization, this all too well, and you've experienced some of these. And so, like, I might be preaching to the choir, but at the same time, you're like, yes, please don't go down that road. Those things will suck the life out of you. They will consume, measurable amount of time and those things. So we're just throwing out some tidbits that, maybe sometimes we've gone down a rabbit hole that we want to help, vicariously. You don't have to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess to answer, actually, now all of that to say, to answer your actual question, when I came to Oregon Trail, I was again hired as their senior/lead pastor, and I actually changed that title from senior to lead because I was like one of the youngest people in the church when I got here. So I was like, I don't feel like I'm senior anything. But anyways, I was lead. Then so to lead pastor, then we went. I had we did have a youth pastor that was on our staff. Again, I use that, give you air quotes of that because she was actually one of my former interns from Cloverdale, which was part of the connection that got me here in the first place. But she was working here as their youth pastor. But again, very part-time. I mean, she was paid, but it was very minimal. I mean, it was like intern level. In fact, I think it was pretty close to what we paid her as an intern at Cloverdale. So again, but she was the youth department. So she was here. And like I said, then it was just her and I, as far as paid staff, when I started. And then as I talked about in previous episodes, the board had kind of recommended, and again, they were saying, hey, think about this and about hiring Dawn back as an associate role, which we did. I decided to do that again. And Dawn and I moved back or had several conversations, and it was 6 months after I got here was when we hired him. When I hired him back, and I guess again that clear distinction, right? It was my decision. There was no, again, the board let me know that they kind of, again, that, and he came back as seniors with all those people that he he had been pastored for all those years. And again, it was a unique role. It was one, and he was here for literally 2 years, and him and I mutually agreed that if he came back, that he was only going to be here for a season. And that was, and like, again, that's probably a whole different show as far as the way that relationship worked and the communication between us. Again, I did not hire him back either until I felt like that the church was ready for him to come back, and that he was ready, because he was incredibly burnt out. I mean, when I came here. And so again, I met with him, regularly through those first 6 months. And so, like I said, just there's a lot more there. But so he came back, and he was halftime when he came back. And so we were, just financially able to swing that. So we had just a very minimal youth pastor salary. And then halftime, and Don was associate pastor at that point. So, so again, and just as we both alluded to, and I think when we talk about staffing, both of us come from a pretty, I guess, and maybe it's not that unique. I was going to say unique situation, but maybe it's probably not actually that unique. That both of us had sat on staffs, as in associate roles. Like you said, you were a missions pastor, I was a youth pastor. We were both the associate pastor, and we talked about that. How we were in the same position at Cloverdale at different times. And so I know that has really shaped my philosophy and practice on staff now at Oregon Trail, of the fact that I have been on a church staff, and I've been, sat in meetings or sat in, in the ranks of the church at those lower places. And like you said, how do you lead with influence, because you don't actually have authority? How do you speak, up the line, whether it's to your senior pastor or to your board, or whatever that looks like as a staff person, or even as a volunteer in a church? Like, how do you influence up without, having authority down? And I think that's, again, like I said, that's a huge topic. I think that's one that applies obviously everybody in lots of different contexts. But I will say, definitely as I go into just kind of what has been my philosophy with Oregon Trail as we have grown, because now we do have multiple staff at our church. And so with that, is my viewpoint and influence on that was largely because of what I experienced as a staff pastor. Right. So so I'll tell you right now, we do have at our church, and we don't have a child center or daycare or anything like that. Like, literally, we don't have that dynamic, which again is one that you do have. And there's a lot of churches that have that kind of separate dynamic that affects your staffing. They said we don't have anything like that at Oregon Trail. So it is pretty clean, I guess, so to speak, as far as everybody that's on staff, on paid staff, is reporting to me, right? I mean, other than, and there is just directly for the church. So currently but I am still the only full-time employee of the church. And so, like I said, and that is on purpose. And that plays into exactly my philosophy of why that is true. And so that the main thing, like I said, is whether it's been through my own experience as a youth pastor and as associate pastor before I sat here. And one I will say is that if you are a staff pastor or a volunteer in your church and just wondering why your lead pastor or your senior pastor like hasn't made decisions, or seems like they take forever. And again, that was my perspective, is like, why does it take so long to make a decision? Right. And like, as a staff person, and I remember saying it, but I'll just say that now that I'm in this seat and learning to manage people and hiring and doing evaluations and do all of these things, is that I have a lot more respect, right, for those lead pastors and for those people that I worked under. And to say that is, and I think I literally told this, is like, I had to go back, and I owed Tommy an apology, right, for some of those times, right, of my attitude of sitting in those, because again, I didn't get it. I thought I knew in that moment, right, but I didn't. So again, I'll just lay that out there right now.
I was 100% right with Tommy all the time, so I haven't had to have that. I'm just like, so no, but I think that those are some of the things, including another thing that we haven't really talked about, and this is just whimsical, and you could dig deeper into this topic as well, is oftentimes when you're inheriting this, and one of the latest statistics, and I would try to get a better source, because I think I was just looking, and it was like a failingchurches.com kind of thing. And it was just speaking to the turnover rate. And so if you're inheriting a church, one of the things is knowing again, what was the past? How did those things happen? And whether we like it or not, when you're coming to an established church, like you said, there's not just a fresh start. Oftentimes there's a baseline and there's some history, just like our testimony. And so knowing what kind of turnover is, I want to say that on that website, it referenced like a senior pastor usually moves on after about a 4-year period was what they quoted. I don't know if that's right, but I think a lot of, those things kind of can vary from time to time. But the point being is, if it's a short amount of time and you're serving those people, sometimes you have to understand as well when you're coming in that they are coming from a standpoint of, if it's unhealthy, you might hear things like, I was here before the last 4 pastors and I'll be here after you. And so there's some things that you kind of have to understand. How is turnover? How has it played its role? You're coming into an established church as opposed to launching one with new history. And sometimes those can be good because, like in our history, we have some really great pastors that have come through the doors. Even though we're smaller and we've dwindled down like to a certain extent, and we have, if you go down, we have like this heritage wall of like pastors. I mean, we have like people that have started ministry for Church of God, like in the Skags in like Cairo, Egypt. We have our general director right now, Jim Lyon, who moved us to the status quo, to the modern day building here in the 80s. Excuse me. And we just have so many rich history and different people, but understanding what took place, where turnover is. And sometimes as leaders, we have to address that. And it really does, it can create a divide, right? Like people will say, well, you're just here for a short time. You're not here for a long period of time. And I don't want to get too comfortable, which segues into a little bit of that might infect the way that they're willing to engage in a key role for volunteering or a layperson, because they're thinking, I've been down this road before. I started a program. I've been a part of something with a lead pastor or a senior pastor, whatever the term is. And then they ended up leaving and pulling the rug out from underneath me. So I don't know that I'm going to stand at arm's reach at this point until I get to that. So there's some other dynamics is what I'm saying that play a role into that. But knowing that with your staff, knowing what you're up against, knowing that we have this thing, quick side note would be, I have like level 1 certification through USA Track and Field, and I was the head varsity coach at a high school. Like, gosh, that's like almost 10 years ago now. I was the varsity coach, and I was in my 20s, and I was like, oh, this is great, But I never wanted to go into coaching full time or at the collegiate level because I was like, that's dumb. Like, coaches have to move; they have to go where the job is.
And
then
now
God
you're a
calls
pastor.
me into ministry, and now I've moved several times anyhow. So I just say that with a grain of salt from the standpoint of knowing that those things are there. And oftentimes, just like where we are, your move was a little bit just down the Treasure Valley. Mine was back to another state. But knowing that God may have a plan and you may have to move, and it might not be the same context that you were in. So knowing that, and having resources, having people to connect with, to not have to recreate the wheel, because if you're spinning everything else that you have plus that, and you're trying to make system changes like you said, that's a daunting task. So get help.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you need help again, whether it can be paid staff or whether it's volunteers. Again, you need help, and so that's, again, looking at that. Now, again, sometimes it's dictated by the financial reality, right? That you don't have any money to hire people. So you have to just rely on volunteers. But yeah, I'll just tell you. So my philosophy is, as we have grown, as we have been able to hire staff, my philosophy was that I would only hire people to do their role. Right. And so I was not going to have people in dual roles at all. And so now, and I say that, and that's why everybody's part-time, right? Because again, we have a youth ministry director, and their only formal, role at our church, other than just other staff duties, right? Because there's something that everybody does because they're staff, like they all have to come to staff meeting, right? Regardless of where you're at, there's things like that. But outside of just staff duties, he only does youth. And so that was one of the things where, again, my children's director is also part-time and she only does kids. Right. And so, again, I think one of the trends that I saw in churches, whether it was even some of myself as I was on staff, as well as when I consulted with other churches and I did a lot of outside speaking, consulting and some stuff in the youth ministry world, one of the consistent things that I saw, right, with struggling youth workers was that they were hired full-time at the church, and one, they were very underpaid, right? Because, and so they were struggling in their family and in their, to get food on the table. And so that obviously affected their jobs. But then the other side of it was that they were doing so many things for the church, right? I mean, everything but youth ministry. I mean, they were cutting the grass, they were running the sound booth, right? They were the webmaster, they were scrubbing the toilets, they were, you name, like they were doing everything for the church because they were the only other employee, right? Other than the lead pastor. And so, but when it came to time to evaluation, they were only being evaluated on the youth ministry because they're the youth pastor, right? And yet they come in and be like, well, I know why the youth ministry is struggling, because you spend 5 minutes a week on it, right? And yet you're working, 50, 60 hours for the church, but you're only spending a few of those on youth ministry because you're so busy doing everything else, right? When the reality was, what the church should have done was hire a janitor, right? Hire a company to mow their grass, right? And find a volunteer to work in the office and then let you do youth ministry. Right. And so that was the philosophy I came with, was that I was never going to do that to my staff. And so, so coming into that, that's why, I mean, we do now, again, we have, and again, we have multiple people on staff, but they're all part-time, because of that, because there's not the workload, right, for our youth pastor to be full-time just doing youth ministry. Right. And so, and again, my hope is that we get to the place where he is, right. He can be. I mean, on most of my staff, they all want to be full-time at some point. But the church has to grow, not just financially, but just, numerically. I mean, we need to, so the workload is there to also warrant that salary, right. And to not just add on a bunch of these extra, duties as assigned to fill their time and to get our, God's money's worth out of their time for having them on staff. So, but one of the things we've done though, is like we did create within our structure of pastoral positions, director positions, and hourly positions. And so again, that structure was not there. It was just kind of if the church hired him and they came in. So yeah, we have those three very distinct roles. And so again, our newest staff person is a Spanish pastor. So he's the only other in a pastoral role. So obviously I'm in a pastoral role, and so is he. And that ultimately comes down to your credentialing, right? Like whether you are licensed or ordained as a pastor. And so that's kind of the differentiating side of that. But that's also the line that the IRS has for employees, by the way. And so you can look at that again. That's a whole probably different topic or discussion for another day. But so we have pastoral role, then we have director roles. So I have 3 people in director roles right now, which is our youth ministry director, our children's ministry director, and our worship and outreach director. So, or worship and I don't forget exactly what her title is. But again, she just like you, she is part-time. She leads the music, our whole music team and production team. And she also helps with our outreach events. So, so that's so those are our 3 director positions, and like I said, they're all part-time. And then we have our hourly, which is our we only have one person in that category right now, which is our office and treasurer. So church secretary, treasurer. So and she's also part-time. She's like more kind of about 3/4 time. Again, our Spanish pastor is half-time, and then all the other director positions they're at half-time as well, or close around that. So so that's kind of where we're at with that now. But then we also have a lot of volunteers that fulfill roles that again we'll have to pay for if we don't have the right people. So like our facilities director example, right? That's it will be an hourly position when it's paid, but right now it's being done by a man in our church that volunteers his time. And so again, so luckily, right, we don't have to pay because we can't afford to. So,
right. Yeah. I mean, I think that those things are there, especially like I guess here would be my quick Tommy story is when you get in and you don't have a staff and you understand those things. Um, my Tommy story would be like I've kind of forgotten the days where like he was having a rough day that you could see as a senior pastor, and he tells you, "Hey, let's hop in the car," and I get to chauffeur him. By the way, we're gonna go love on somebody because no better cure than to share the love that you want kind of with other people. And with Tommy, that was like, let's go to Lee's Candy. Now we're truly taking candy to the person and connecting the dot that needed it, but a byproduct was you got to sample a little bit while you were there. And so like I totally just, in the lightheartedness, someone once described Tommy before I came out there. They said he's a big jovial fella that's the closest that you'll meet to Santa Claus on earth that's real. And so sorry, spoiler alert kids as we move into that season. But the reality is that was totally Tommy, and I miss those days where I've had, like, we can call him in contact, but just those little substant days where he could just grab something, or now reflecting back on those that so if you don't have a staff, man, get connected even maybe with other people in your church, or people outside of your church is also like a healthy way. And I'm not saying just to spew or to do those things as you're looking for staff. If you don't have a staff, do that, but be cautious with who you do that with, in the sense of don't vomit on all the people that you're serving. Like find a constructive way. In Seattle, man, I feel like, even that incorporates maybe even some counseling from time to time, kind of, if you don't have a mentor, but also a counselor, to have a moment where you can kind of have a brain dump. So anyhow, I wanted to put those things in there too, that if you've heard all this thus far and you're like, man, I just really wish that I seek that, because I think it's important. I think, if you get isolated, that's when Satan does some of his best work. When two or more are gathered, you can still point to true north, and that compass is still fixed on Jesus. And so I want to remind people of that. If you're there, if you're struggling, if you're a one-man show, so to speak, and you haven't added the pieces that we have, even if they're part-time, man, seek that out. Brian and I are part of groups outside of obviously where we serve, both nationally and globally. And so like find resources and people that you can pour into. If we've gone through staff, we've talked about key volunteers, we talked about lay people. Honestly, the church doesn't roll, like Brian said, without lay people that have a passion for that. And oftentimes those lay people are going to help speak into a season and maybe even some of the programs that you develop, because they are so passionate about it. They want to take it on, they want to run with it. And so some of our greatest programmatic things that we have, maybe like, and I hate to use that word program because then it feels like it's so dictated and regimented, but like the program could be outreach, to go and find a need in the community and do that, because they see it, they identify with it, and it becomes something that they're super passionate about. And then ultimately we can get on board. And so yeah, just that would be my kind of quick, kind of down and dirty, to add in some of those things, as far as, you talked on those roles, pastoral, director, and hourly. But also, if you don't have some of those things, I'll talk about that side real quick on that. So those would be the things that I would just kind of throw in there, is just as a reminder. And man, if you have any questions on these things, or you're trying to develop this, don't go at this alone. Like we said, there's a lot of different places, a lot of different ways that you can get resources, and everybody's doing it. But find the one that works for you. And obviously this goes without saying is, you know, I have that motto of like, work like it depends on me, but pray like it depends on God, who ultimately is leading us and guiding us. Whether your role is as the pastor-led church, or you have that influence in a board-led church, they're looking for you to be the spiritual shepherd. And so make sure that you have that connectivity above all else too. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think just thanks for that word. Great word. And I think just to add on, tag on the end, is I know when it comes to staffing or hiring, which it's not just the church. I think we have this problem in church, but we see it widespread now, is like nobody can find good help, and every place is hiring, and kind of, okay, so what happens when you're ready to hire? Like, how do you find them, whatever? And I'll say is that, that never overlook hiring from within, right? Or bringing in from, again, potentially people who have been volunteers or worked their way, then just bring them on staff if you can, and if they have a calling. And I say it just is most of my staff now, I mean, outside of my Spanish pastor, he's the only one that has not been hired from within our congregation. And I think, again, there's pluses and minuses both ways. And I think to look at that, but especially in part-time positions, like nobody's going to move here, right? For a 15-hour a week youth director job, right? I mean, so the reality is, like, if that's the road, and like I said, that's the road that we're committed to, and if we do that, then we are pretty much pigeonholed from hiring locally or from hiring within. And so, but so far though, it's worked out tremendous for us. So, but yeah, thanks for listening, guys. We'd love to hear from you if you have ideas for content or problems you want us to talk about or address, whatever it be. We'd love to hear from you, and just keep serving God with everything you have. Because just as TJ said, like, it does depend on God. It is his church. And whether you're in it by yourself or you're managing a huge staff, that fact never changes.
Be an ambassador and be blessed, guys.
Acts 20:28. So guard yourselves and God's people. Feed and shepherd God's flock, his church, purchased with his own blood, over which the Holy Spirit has appointed you as leaders. The Acts 2028 podcast is a broadcast production of In His Grip Publishing. Our theme music is Achievement by Giovanni Bruno. We'd love to hear from you on our social media accounts or through email. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram at Acts 2028 Podcast, or send us an email at acts2028podcast@gmail.com. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, leave us ratings and reviews, and even give us your email so you can be notified of new episodes. Thank you for listening, and until next time, we hope that you will lead wherever God has put you, and together we can all live out Acts 2028 as we serve in the established church.